Welcome to Puck Talk CS. I'm Matthew Mugno alongside Steve Murno. We're dressing today. Why? Jimmy Vesey, Ryan Lindgren traded. We're here to break it down. We couldn't get the immediate breakdown yesterday, but we're here to talk it out, fleshed out. Dust is settled, and even more seems to be on the horizon, Steve. It's that time of the year. Trade deadline's coming up, brother.
It is, and unfortunately, it isn't like past seasons. Past seasons we knew what was coming. We were getting a big fish. So are we getting big fish, small fish? What are we doing here? Let's talk some puck, baby.
All right, so let's start, obviously, with the big trade. Here's our break of it. Ryan Lindgren featuring, ya boy's tweet. Um, All right, let's start, Steve. I don't know if you want to go by asset or just the breakdown overall. I kind of want to talk first about. Sorry, I'm trying to find a tweet, man. I had a tweet that blew up yesterday, and it was about, or an X post, um, about just like my quick thoughts on the trade. It was kind of fire. All right, I'll pull it up in a moment. It was like one of those I'm going off type of things, where I'm like in that I'm in my what do they call that? Something state, flow state. So Lindy, to me, this trade was a massive win, and I think you and I disagree partially on it. Um, so the Rangers trade Lindgren, Vesey, and Kempf, Hank Kempf, who I actually got to broadcast the game that he was in yesterday for
That's
Cornell.
awesome.
And they get Parson and Dahan and two picks back. One of them was their pick. One of them has to do with Carolina and where they will finish the season. So a second and a fourth this year, which was also great draft stock that they acquired for two players that were going to be free agents, right, Steve? Like these two guys were going to the market, and it was either the Rangers were signing them or they were gone. So they got a return for two players, four pieces, whether or not they're high value or not. They got four pieces for them. I think that was huge. And I think it goes to show what Drury can do in a situation where he didn't inherit a team with a lot of assets, right? Like at first, a lot of the criticisms were of Drury were that, oh, okay, so he's going to make a move at the deadline and maybe figure something out in the summer, and that's really all he does. And in this situation, we saw he's ready to make moves, and we saw that he was willing to move Truba, Kako, Goodrow, and now he's cutting bait with some of the easier pieces to move in order to, I think, get to maybe some of the more hard dealings or to see if he can work something later in the week.
Yeah, I think this was clearly an eye move for the future more than a current pursuit, for a playoff spot. And that's okay. We still have a chance at the playoffs. I think getting rid of Lindgren and Jimmy Vesey, you could still get to where you need to be. Does it make it a little bit harder? Yeah, of course, especially with Adam Fox now out. But let's be honest, there was no interest. And I think you can agree, everyone listening can agree, there really was no interest in re-signing either one of these players this offseason. So moving on from him, it was obviously a foregone conclusion. You had to get as much capital as you can out of it. Jimmy Vesey is not really a loss. You look at him fighting the practically the whole year just to stay in the lineup, and there's so many other guys that you could plug in. You could put Othman in. I want to talk about him later in the pod. You could put Kaliev in there. Name it, plug it in, not a problem. And let's be honest, Ryan Lindgren has not been good this year. We love him, great player, tough as rocks. He's stepped up in some big moments, especially in 2022. But he has not. He's had a horrible year. 2 years ago, you go back to that 22 season, even 21. Him and Adam Fox were inseparable. And that's not the case anymore, and I think Dahan will slot in for Lindgren. And you look at it, the Rangers got the second rounder and the fourth rounder, and it was all about restock. And I think the draft capital, you talk about that asset management. You're really the biggest guy, I think, out of all of New York Ranger media that I really keep hearing about. Asset management. Nobody really talks about that. So I do think that's like it's eye opening once you catch on to it. But I do think Jury's been really good with the draft capital. I think moving forward, that this kind of restocking that you mentioned with Kako and Truba, it's been huge, and it's going to go a long way. I do want to get your grade on this trade overall.
My grade is an a strong A. I truly believe, Steven, that this was a massive win. You could have lost these players to free agency, right? you just mentioned they likely weren't going to come back. And there was a time where I thought at the beginning of the season, maybe you sign Ryan Lindgren for term and pay him, maybe like 2.5, 3 million a year. He was looking for four. But as the season went on, you saw that his ultimate warrior status. This was a player, kind of, one of those heartbeats of a team. Maybe not the core player, but a core player, right? Or kind of like when you're exercising, maybe the muscle you're not exercising every day, but it's important for the bigger, for the bench, for the squat that you need. That was Lindgren. He wore it. He wore every puck. He was down and back out of the tunnel every night. But that clearly wore him down. And I also think this is a major win for the Lindgren part. I'm going to get to VC in a moment too, which I think makes it even more of a win. He was at a point where you can either extend this player for what he's done or move on from the player knowing what is to come. And I think that Chris Drury, I don't think he learned, right? This is the way I phrased it the other day, but I don't think he learned from the Girardi and Stahl mistake. But I think this is why he's a capable manager in charge right now, because he looked at Lindgren's current state and said, this can't get much better for his position. And he'll likely not be happy if he's moved off of a unit with Adam Fox and earning far less time for term, right? He was going to want term by July, and the Rangers were unwilling to give that to him. And I think from what we saw from very similar style players in Girardi and Stahl 10 years ago now, it's the right move. And we don't need confirmation on that. Jimmy Vesey was a PTO signing in 2022 that played his way onto the roster, that then played his way into an extension, a 2-year extension that was up this summer. It was very clear, above 30 years old, for his role. It was great on a President's Trophy winning team. And I think where that started to falter was post injuries in the conference final. If you recall, he was a critical piece that we lost in that conference final against Florida to injury. And since then, he just never found his way back into the lineup. And I think it was fair. Intelligent player, a player that went from a Hobie Baker top prospect when the Rangers signed him in 2016. You moved him for cap for Panarin. You bring him back on a PTO. He's a very different player, a penalty killer, a grinder, and he can score. He had scoring touch. But at the end of the day, you essentially turned a PTO contract and player and Ryan Lindgren, who was a fringe top pair defender that worked very well and had chemistry with your number one defenseman, into assets. Vlad Nemesnikov, when he came over, was a piece that was basically the one for one for JT Miller. You're getting a player like a Nemesnikov in Parsonen, not the same style, 24 years old, a center, which the team needs depth wise. We just talked about it last episode. He's built like a tank. It's exactly what the management's looking for. He's the same type of player as Domestikov in the sense that there's a risk and reward for that move. And you don't know what his upside is, but you're going to give it a try. You're going to give it a run. You also got a veteran defenseman to calm things down on the defensive side of the puck and 2 picks. It's an A for me. I know that was a long explanation. I want to hear your grade, Steve.
No, I see that. I certainly agree with A in the long term. I'm going to give it a B as of right now. I think, not mainly. I don't disagree with like anything really you've been saying. I just, it's it's tough to grade this an A because we have to see how the full asset management is going to come down to. Like I think I'll repeat this later on in the epi, but I think the summer is going to be the real trade deadline where you're going to see where these moves and what's going to come into fruition. Ryan Lindgren, to me, was never, and he will never be a long-term player. It's just that's not who he is. Considering his style of play, his smaller physical nature, his injury history, he just never was going to pan out that way. And I think to your point, Jimmy Vesey, if you told me, in 22 when we picked him up that it's 2025 and he's still on this team, I would have been like, "What? No way! Like what? Like are we the Sharks now?" Like, but I think you got to give him credit, and that's a testament to who he is as a player. But I'll give it a B. I think again the Rangers did fine here. Moving these players, no brainer. Dahan, I think he's a pending free agent too. Am I right on that?
Both are. Parson and DeHaan are both. And just want to add to, it's only this season, but Ryan Lindgren had 50% cap retained. So that'll tack on to this year's Ranger cap. Just wanted to add that into because it was a small piece to the deal.
Yeah, we had the space. But in terms of the assets, let's talk about the assets that we got. The Han free agent. He's serviceable. We obviously need some help on the back end, and he'll provide that for this year. And he's not really an exciting or a long term replacement for Lindgren, but I definitely think he's a player that when the year's over, he's definitely going to be affordable. He's only 33 years old, so if you want to say, you know what, I don't think he's going to be the same player as Gustafsson, but we kind of missed Gustafsson. You can always use a defender, going into next year. He's somebody that I think you could get at a fairly cheap price if you wanted to keep him moving into next year. I think what's more intriguing for me is Parsonen. I think from what I'm hearing, this is a player that the Rangers have had on their radar for a couple of years, and I think we are, whether you want to admit it or not, we do struggle organizationally down the middle. So I think, you could put him, at center on the third line and move Mika, on the wing with JT's line, where he kind of had a little pop. There's room to play with here. And I think that will be interesting for Laviolette to move around and see what happens. And he's another player too that when the year's said and done, you might want to bring him back on a fairly team friendly contract to help out. You look at the same things every year. We are a little thin on the bottom six year to year to year. So I think it works out fairly fine. So A for you, B for me.
I really like Parsonen. Okay. And he's a player that I've liked for a little while as well. All Ranger fans know that he scored his first, I believe, not just one, but two career goals against us in 22-23. And that was like his coming out party where scouts, analysts around the league were like, keep an eye on this guy. He has 4 goals and 7 assists. And I believe it's over 30 games at least. I don't know the exact numbers. I'll pull him up in a moment. But he's built like a tank. Like you see the way he drives the net. He has power forward tendencies. Yeah, the production might not be there this moment, but you just brought into the organization a 24-year-old center and an organization that outside of Zibanejad, Miller, and Trocheck, who, by the way, like you just mentioned, Zibanejad isn't even playing center right now. You did not have. You do not have guys in their prime or close to their prime at center. You basically are banking on drafting a few centers, which I pray they do, even if it's with, picks beyond the first round, or you have to bring them into the organization. But it's hard to do that because you have 3 NHL veteran centers in your lineup. So it's not like, you only have JT Miller and 3 young guys and you're willing to bring in another asset, right? You're looking at the lineup right now and saying, well, we have 3 centers that are going to play every night. And where's the room for another young guy to make some space? And like you mentioned, they have Zibanejad listed on the right wing right now next to Miller, who's at 1C. So this gives Parsonen an opportunity to run, right? And why not? He's 24 years old. I like that aspect of the deal. And again, the fact that this team and this front office was able to make a move and get assets that could be valuable to the team moving forward and at least will be valuable for this end of the season, I'm impressed by. And I think it's also a precedent of things to come.
So now we talk about assets we just got. Let's talk about assets now that we already have. Now, and I think this is another big conversation because you just moved Jimmy Vesey. Now you just created an opening and an opportunity for Brendan Othman. Now, I think the Brendan Othman now, I think he needs an opportunity now. I think he should be on the team for the rest of the year. I think
Yeah.
this is the prime example now, and I think I really wonder. This was somebody going back 3-4 years ago that this was like the second coming. This was the future for this team. And I think last year when we brought him up for a game and sent him back down, and he did a lot of stints, you really wonder what that does to a player. And I think now that you have an opportunity, the future of this team is so in limbo. This is the prime opportunity to bring some of these guys up and play them, especially if I'm not calling this season a lost cause. But if you don't make the playoffs, and again, it's going to be an uphill battle, you could still get there. You're only 4 points out. But again, it's going to be tough. And I think, not that these are meaningful games, but if you don't make the playoffs, or even if you make the playoffs, and get eliminated in the first or second round, let's get some of these assets some playing time. Let's get them experience. Let's get Matt Rempe in there. Let's get Othman in there. Let's keep Othman in there. There should be absolutely no reason why Othman gets sent down again for the rest of the season. He should be a mainstay in this lineup. Do you agree with me?
I do. And a lot of our special guests concur with you, Steve, which I'm glad to say. Dan Rosen, Colby Cohen, and Steve Ellis all have come on this show in the last month, right? And there's been a lot of action to talk about. Dan Rosen came on the week before JT Miller was traded to the Rangers and said the same thing. At this point, I feel if you're listen, actually, I'm going to pull up Daily Faceoff to kind of display what you and I are talking about because I think it puts a lot into context when you look at the lineup as is.
I think
See, is
when
it up?
you take a look at it too, like you look at Kako and other players that didn't pan out, like playing time is so important. So you got to give the opportunities.
Right? And Steve, look at this lineup. Honestly, it's quite unflattering. Very quickly, we went from a full contender that was nickel and diming for pieces like Gustafson, Quick, and Wheeler a summer ago. And now you're looking at the lineup and saying, oh, this is starting to look like a little more than just like a light retool. But with that said, you mentioned Othman. He's going to be in the lineup. Berard, who I thought looked very good for a stint, he's now in the lineup. And I think Berard is in the lineup right now. But Gabriel Perreault, when the season ends for Boston College, whenever that may be, it will not go longer than April. He will be in the lineup. And this is great because if this team finds its way in the playoffs, that's great experience for them. And if not, you've sold, you've acquired assets, and you're giving players that are going to help this team in the future the opportunity to play in the National Hockey League. So I 100% agree with you, Steve. The one thing I'll add, though, I did mention it just now. We are, the Rangers are looking a lot thinner than I anticipated. And we'll likely see Riley Smith go and maybe some other pieces that are uh, easier to move. But I think if this team wants to get better, whether it's the trade deadline or the summer, they're going to have to trade someone with value. And I think that's going to be a harder conversation for you and I to have.
I agree 100% with you. How
Like
about
this team is, you can't go into next year with this team. And we know that's not going to be the case, but oof,
you're
this
right.
lineup quickly changed.
You're right. And you do have Chris Kreider not in there. He's out.
And
But
Foxy.
and Fox too as well. But I do want to appreciate, let's be positive for a second. Will Cooley, right there on the second line with JT and Mika, he's looked absolutely fantastic. I mean, Will Cooley, I did not think when this was a player that surprised us all and made the team out of training camp last year. I did not think he would develop into the type of player he is. I mean, he has been one of our best players all season long on all aspects, physicality, creating plays, he's been a spark, and the one thing that I said last year in my end of the year grades is I want to see him capitalize a little bit more on offensive opportunities. And he's done that this year. You look at the 2-goal game that he had a couple weeks ago in Columbus. That was a big win. He's had some big goals. He had the game tying goal Friday against the Leafs shorthanded. By the way, we are the best shorthanded team in the NHL. Records and not. I don't know how we're so good shorthanded. We should just play the whole game shorthanded. But yeah, Will Cooley's been awesome. So I cannot stress that enough. Like he is a dog.
And Steve, you know what I take away from that statement? Chris Drury selected him with a second round draft pick. And I'm not saying that every draft pick, right? It's a lottery. And that is the reality of the prospect competition with the NHL draft. 32 teams now, and they're all looking to gain prospective players through that system. The marketing makes you believe that every pick is going to hit, and we know that's not true, especially in New York. But when they do hit, it does give you some hope that the Rangers just got their own second round pick back from Colorado for two players that were not going to be on the roster next year. And that was also a player drafted by Chris Drury, Brendan Hoffman, drafted by Chris Drury. So that's great to see that they're in the lineup. And I love what you said about Cooley, that he's an impact player. This is a player that now is on the second line. He's become impact. And if you make the proper moves, it only makes your team deeper if he's back to the third line next season. And that's what I love about his style of play. It really does adjust to wherever he is on this team.
Yeah, and I think I don't even know why I'm saying this, but we all know there's zero chance that we're trading Othman or Perot. I like you said, I think there's a better fact that these players, especially Perot, was in the lineup, then he will be traded. So I don't know why I felt the need to say that, but I think it's very obvious if you're sitting there wondering, what are the Rangers going to do this trade deadline? I think it's very simple. It's going to be retooling for the future, and I think the main moves are going to come in the summer. And I think Drury has already made the main moves. JT Miller was the big trade deadline acquisition that came a few weeks before the actual trade deadline. And when it comes down to it, Drury's made a fair share of moves this year. Look what happened. You sounded off on some of them. Got rid of Lindgren, you got rid of Vesey, you got rid of Trubum, you got rid of Kako, you got rid of Hedel, you got rid of Mancini. You brought in JT, you got Dahan, you brought in Vakanainen, you brought in Will Borgen, who's another one who I want to praise. So, I mean, that's a lot of moves. If you told me in the beginning of the year that VZ, Truba, Kako, Hedel, all these guys, Lindgren would be traded, I would be like, oh my gosh, we're getting the first pick. Jury's made a lot of moves and he really has restructured. I do think you have to give him credit. He structured a team that is competitive. You can still make the playoffs. But again, the main goal down the line is still achievable. And you mentioned Will Cooley and this being picked in the second round. We've picked up a boatload of picks from all these players. You might sit there and listen, I'm no Vakanainen fan. You might say, that was the return. No, the return is still yet to come. So I think you got to give Drury a little round of applause for what has happened, with this team this season. So I think, not to say that he saved himself. We still need to see what happens in the summer. But I certainly give Drury, if we were to grade, his performance this year, I'd give Drury an A.
Yeah. I think the way he's dealt with things, we know he's got a brass pair in between his legs, and that's a reality. Like, he was cutthroat with Gaudreau. That upset fans. He was cutthroat with Truba. That upset people outside of the organization. But the reality is, New York is always going to get top tier players. Even when Gordon and JD initiated the rebuild, they went out and signed Artemi Panarin. They went out and traded for Jacob Truba, moving Neil Pionk in the process. I think that Drury knows right now, maybe he can make a deal at the deadline and buy. I think he knows that you sell if you can gain something and buy, fantastic. And I think it would require moving a player of value, and that may be like a Keandre Miller. But for the sake of this conversation, when July comes or the end of June, when we're speculating what July 1st is going to be like, I'm not doubting that the New York Rangers are going to buy in free agency or make a monster trade because players want to play in New York. And we've seen that their entire history. Not only that, but even in their modern history, say the last 10 years, we've seen they've gone out and acquired players to move the needle. I think it's going to happen again. I don't even think that Perot will see. Offman we're seeing right now, Parson, and they're getting opportunities, but I don't think that they're going to just patiently wait for these guys to grow into their roles. I think they're going to bring in some players and make it a competitive camp, a competitive season, earn your roster spot. And I won't doubt that there will be some, you know, B and above tier players coming into the organization around that time. So I think that's something to factor into. Like right now, it's let's see what the young guys can do. If this team gets in, great. If not, okay. And I think when it comes to the summer, that's when they're going to really, wave around the green cash and start printing bills at the mint, man.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. I was gonna say you got it in there at the last second. Money talks, and that's something the New York Rangers have shown that they are not afraid to throw around. So money talks, and New York I think speaks to a lot of players. So I think in that boat we're fine. I want to pivot back to a conversation we had last year, and I think this is more so relevant now than it was then, or more so relevant just overall, organizationally, structurally. And it's the fact that this core, Artemi Panarin, Chris Kreider, Mika Zibanejad, Vinny T, and Adam Fox. You could throw Igor in there or you could leave him out. I think Igor's kind of in both categories. But the core is the team, whether you like it or not. And let's be honest, Artemi Panarin has not been good. Vinny T has not been good recently. Adam Fox, injured now, has not been good recently. Chris Kreider has not been good recently. So that's your core right there. They have not been good. And I think that speaks to the elements of this team that the team right now is not good. Mika Zibanejad has not been good. The whole core has not played well. And I think I remember you echoing this at the end of last year, after getting eliminated by Florida. But the fact is that the core is the team and the core is still intact. You could get rid of the Lindgrens and the Trubas and the Veseys. The core is still there. And I think when you get to the summer, like you just mentioned, some serious, serious conversations are going to be had about the core of this team because, I don't, when you get the same result year after year after year, you start to pick and question. And a lot of these players are not improving. I'm not seeing improvements from Kreider. I'm not seeing improvements from Mika. I love Kreider. Don't get me wrong. One of my favorite Rangers of all time. But I'm not seeing improvements from any of these players, especially Adam Fox from a couple years ago. I love Panarin. He's my favorite Ranger, but he's been terrible. He has not been good recently. So, the core, Vinny T too. We were, blessing him a few
Tooting
months
his horn.
ago.
Yeah.
We were talking letters and C's a couple months ago, and he has really fizzled out. When was the last time he had a goal? So the core is still the main structural problem to me, and this is something that it's not going to get addressed at this trade deadline. But when the offseason comes, this is going to be a major conversation. And we already heard the rumblings last year about blowing the core up. I think you're gonna really, we're really gonna get to the meat and potatoes of it in this offseason.
And why not? You have arguably the best goaltender in the world, a Norris Trophy winning defender. And for the forwards you mentioned, Kreider, to me, you know, I think he's being a really good teammate and fighting through his injuries to be a presence for the team. But is this what we're going to see more of now on the last few years of his deal? And if so, this is something else that I don't like about the way the internet talks about it. Like, you have to give Ryan Lindgren all the credit in the world. He was a really strong piece for the New York Rangers. No one else was doing what he was doing out there for this team. And you saw he was the original. If you recall online, there was a lot of conversation. When Lindgren was out of the lineup, the team would lose. He was a major piece of this team. But when it comes to an end, I choose to look at how the player was impactful for the organization. That does not need to be stated enough for Chris Kreider. But it's also fair to acknowledge, is this what's to come for Kreider? Is it going to be a lot more injury riddled seasons? And that's where the conversations get hard. But it's also to look at the fact that this team has, well, again, arguably the best goaltender in the world. This is not a Blackhawk situation or a San Jose Sharks situation where you say, oh, we're just going to let things build. And the New York Rangers know that they have players. They just need to surround them with the right pieces. So I think when you talk about Zibanejad, Friedman has acknowledged it too. And I don't think he's far off with suggesting we've seen what they did to Goodrow and Truba. And if it means getting out of that deal, I think Drury's going to try all options. And we know that about him. So I agree with you, Steve. When it comes to the core, we're going to see a shakeup. And whether it's at this deadline, I don't think so. It could be. Or in the summer, we're going to see that on the horizon because um, we know that I think this group has kind of run its course, and we're starting to see that, especially with the Lindgren move. Like they were willing to move on from Lindgren. Maybe that seemed like an easy target this season with how he's played, but I don't think he's going to be the last guy to be shipped out that has had a major impact on the club since they've competed since 2019, right? When all these guys clicked together, started making the playoffs, and went on two conference final runs.
Yeah, and I don't think it's crazy at all to sit here and say that Jury has not tried to already shed Mika, and deal him off. And I think all options were on the table, and I think he's really tried in the past. I don't think anybody wanted him, and I think with Mika again, we know that that situation is tough. But now that we're starting to talk about the core, I want to talk about something else that's a problem with this team. And again, it's not gonna it's a structural problem. It's a core problem. It's not anything that's going to be addressed anytime soon. You know, the only thing that can fix it is play better. And I think the power play for us has not been good. And I think we got to do away with the 5 forward power play unit. Even with Fox out now, we went with that 5 forward group against the Leafs on Friday. It was Lafreniere, Miller, Panarin, Zibanejad, and Trocheck, and just it looked horrible. I mean, it was not, if you watch that Friday game, I mean, it was we couldn't get shots on the power play, and I think again the power play is a staple of New York Rangers hockey these last few years, and the power play has just been awful. I mean, even throwing JT Miller in there, you would think, if you threw JT Miller, in last year's team, I'm like, oh my goodness, we're cooking. But I mean, we just look so lost, and when you do things right, and then the things that you're doing right, you're doing them like bad. That's how there's a structural problem, and it's just it makes me want to rip my hair out.
Steve, this is my thought too. To build on this, I got a few bullet points to go here. When you talk about the power play being a staple, sometimes you just look at the simple things that suggest that it's time to move on. That's one of them. This team's bread and butter was the power play. You don't have Kreider out there right now. It's kind of mumbo jumbo. Today in practice, they had Jones at quarterback for power play one, right? Okay, that's fine. But this is a player that's been disgruntled too. Like, it's very strange how that's gone about too. Like, we don't really know who's on the power play unit. And with that stated, one of the players that's being held out at tonight's game, by the time when we get off of here, they're going to trade him.
Yeah.
Riley Smith is being held out. Another aspect to suggesting that the core, is I think at this point has run its course. At least this one, the one from 2019 to 24, is that how many of these players have come into the organization, turned out, and have found success elsewhere? You could talk about the cap, right? It's a cap league, salary cap league, but you look at Patrick Kane last night scoring in the Stadium Series game. Jack Roslovic's finding success in Carolina. Eric Gustafson finding success in Detroit. Now, to me, Riley Smith to me was a good player for this New York Rangers team. If he was on last year's team, we would have loved him. It's the fact that the team didn't play well, and he was kind of like everyone looks at him like the shiny new penny. when I think there was a little bit, maybe not an overhype, but I think people were expecting more from him when we know that he was just a piece to assist the core, to assist Zibanejad and Kreider. And those two did not have a good season. So I think he kind of just was now a veteran presence, a solid NHL winger in a lineup that didn't really have an identity. So, yeah, I think it's a shame because how many players do you have to turn out of the organization? Now Riley Smith's going to go, and it makes sense. Why would he want to play on this team when he can go elsewhere and play on a team that'll go deep in the playoffs when you see a lot of these players turning out and it's not that's the only thing that's unsettling to me about dealing Smith is that that suggests that the players that he was supposed to support were not doing their carrying their responsibility.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Riley Smith has not been like has not done anything like majorly wrong. He's not a big problem. I don't think Riley Smith is in, the top 10 players that are underperforming this year. I think it's quite opposite the other way around. But when you look at it and you look at the goal and what he was brought in to achieve, you just look at it and you say, you know what? It's not achievable. And you just got to pivot. And we praised Drury about getting capital assets. I think you got to get rid of Riley Smith. Well, the vision for the beginning of the year and what he was brought in to do, and I think he's a fantastic player. And if we had him on last year's team, we had him and JT last year. Oh my goodness. I think we're raising the what, but what the result of last year or the result of this season, plans have changed and things are pivoting now, and Riley Smith no longer is or the team's vision is no longer sustainable, and Riley Smith just doesn't offer you anything moving forward. I think jury has changed. He didn't enter the season with this vision, but jury has now changed it. Once he dealt Truba, he knew that things had to change after that miserable and disgusting November and December, the 4-15. But when you go 4-15, you sit there and you say, you know what? You're the Cincinnati Bengals now. You are not getting to where you need to be, and you have all these other structural issues that are going on. You just have to get rid of Riley Smith and get in the capital. And like you said, get in that second and fourth round pick. And you know what? Now you're going to draft Will Cooley that's going to come up in another 2 years. And you're going to draft, another Lafreniere, and then you bring in those free agents with that money. And now, you have a suitable team in a few years. And again, it's not something like this core is like, in 2 years, we're going to be the team. This core, I don't want to say it's ran its course because I love this core, man. When you watch this team for the last few years, you grow such an attachment to them, emotionally as a fan. But, whether you like it or not, this core is coming, fast to the finish line. And I think Jury knows that, and he's going to reevaluate it in the summer. So I definitely agree with you. As a fan, it pains you, but Riley Smith is definitely somebody. I said on the last episode, he's got to go. If Riley Smith's on this team on Saturday morning, then we have a big problem.
He's gonna go. He's gone already. He's being held out tonight. I think their draft picks already in the conversation.
A prediction: who does he go to? Let's throw out some.
Oh,
Let's throw out some quick predictions here. Who do you think we deal Riley Smith to?
I think a contender. Like I don't know who. I genuinely don't know. I'm not researched on it, but I, I would throw out there like I wouldn't be shocked if it was like a Dallas. A team that just wants to get super deep and build a super deep lineup. I don't know what their winger situation is. His brother's in Dallas, so maybe that's enticing. Could we be shocked if it's a Vegas? Could we be shocked if it's a Florida? They just put Matthew Kachuk on LTIR, have 8 million in cap. They picked up Seth Jones. They still have 8 million to spend with that LTIR money. Maybe they go for Riley Smith. So I don't know. I just think like I'd be happy to see him succeed, and I'd be happy to see Ryan Lindgren succeed. In Colorado and wherever Smith ends up, because they're still to me good players. They got a lot of hate in New York this year, but I think they're good players. I think Smith didn't deserve any flack. Lindgren maybe, but I also would like to see him play really well for Colorado. Where do you think he ends up?
I think two teams I could see him going to. I think, how about Minnesota? Minnesota every year seems like they're in the middle of the pack and they just can't get over their hunch. So I think they could use, some scoring depth. And how about Edmonton? Edmonton is another team that I think could use that low tier depth. You don't know if the whole Evander Kane situation. I mean, this guy's had every surgical procedure in the book this past year, so I really don't know. They were kind of banking on him to come back, and I just really don't know if you could trust that. So I think Riley Smith could be a fit there. But honestly, if, from a New York Rangers standpoint of things, you just gotta, deal him to whoever's gonna give you the most picks. How about maybe somebody like Columbus? I don't know if the Rangers would deal with them, but somebody like Columbus could kind of use a retool and one final push to keep them consistent. They have the playoff spot, so but yeah,
All right, I'm going to stand on a take here, Steve.
let's
I
hear
haven't
it.
even said it yet, but I'm going to stand on it. You said that your thought process is young players come up, you have some draft stock, you draft, you bring in free agents or trade assets, and players that will play immediately for the NHL team that are very good for potentially the top six, say, maybe fill out some depth, and you're back in contention. You said, now I don't want to nitpick. You said a few years. I don't think I don't think it'll take a few years. I think this trade deadline and I think this summer are going to be enough to put the Rangers right back into contention next year.
I agree with you.
Maybe not like conference final, Stanley Cup final, but again, you have the best goaltender in the world. You never know. You just signed him to a big deal, and you hope some of these guys rebound. Like I said to Zach Phillips when we previewed the Toronto game, it feels like me and you had these years in high school. The year where it's like you and I weren't good at math. You're taking test after test. You're working so hard, but you're just not getting it, and you just like, I just need to get to the end of the year. That's what this year feels like
Oh,
from
that's
the start, right? Like
That's the second good
snowball effect.
analogy from you on this episode. You've been lacking the analogies the last few episodes, but now you're coming back strong right in time for the trade deadline. That's a good one.
Like snowball effect, where I don't think even with the Four Nations, like it was almost too late to have that break. This team needed a break in like early November to get over this. And I think at this point, just finish out the year, see where you finish. I just don't think, and listen, Steve, maybe you think it'll be a few years, and I respect your opinion, but I don't think it'll be. I think they will get themselves into a position next year to be a lot better than they were this year.
I agree 100% with you. When I said, like 2 years down the line, I meant more of like drafting a player and then getting them in and acclimated to the NHL. But I agree with you, and you wanna look at recent history to show you why. Look at last year's team. Last year's team coming off of 2023. 2023 was a major pivot. Getting rid of Gallant. Getting changing pieces, changing kind of the vision of this team and the structure of how this team played. With the remaining pieces, and they were the best team in the regular season. So I think 100%. I think this team is definitely a team that has pieces that could still compete and be competitive. And again, you get in, you have a major advantage on all these teams in net in Igor Shesterkin. So I 100% agree with you. There is no reason why this team, with a few minor tweaks here and there, and get some kids playing time, and we get another Will Cooley inserted in the lineup, and then with throwing a free agent in there, and maybe some, glimpses of Panarin coming back from 2 seasons ago, and Vinny T, you still have a recipe of winning. And again, a lot of this we're talking like we were eliminated right now. Like there's still some stuff to play with, in this season. It's just you have to win now. Teams like Nashville, the Islanders, you have to beat these teams. And I think, it's been the recipe all season long, especially on back-to-backs. You lose one, you win one, you're not going to make the playoffs if that's going to happen. And this team hasn't shown me that they could come out and win. You really need to win 3 games in a row, and this team has not shown me that they can win 3 games in a row. As simple as that sounds, last year you couldn't lose 3 games in a row. This year is the opposite. You can't win 3 games in a row. So I do agree with you though. This is the recipe is still there.
And one last thought. The tombstone's not out yet because, as you just mentioned, we just said Igor and Loff are still on this team. Trocheck's still on this team. JT Miller will be. Artemi Panarin is still under contract next season. Like they still have a player that's a potential 90 to 100 point scorer. Granted, We haven't seen that in full this season. He'll likely finish 80 and above points. Fans have every right to be frustrated with stretches of poor play, especially compared to last year, but he's still going to produce. Like he's still going to put up probably 80 points this year. So who knows what's in store next year. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead. I would like to actually look retrospectively and say, while we're admiring what Drury has done with this trade, with the trade deadline coming up, and retooling, rebuilding some of this roster, let's also acknowledge how good this core was. I feel like you don't need to bash on the history that they've written, the last few years. This team, these players, most wins in a season in organization's history. They played under three different head coaches. They faced COVID, right? They overcame COVID. Two conference final runs where they lost to one team that lost the cup and one team that won the cup. Took both teams to game sixes. So I also think there's a lot to be happy with. And although they did not achieve the ultimate goal, and I understand that, I still think there are positives that they brought in their impact. And I felt that it was a very entertaining ride the last few years with this exact group. There's still going to be players that are going to be moving forward on this team with a little bit of a different looking squad. So it's not the same core, but players like Lindgren, Stephen McDonald award win, he was a fan favorite. So I think we also have to acknowledge like that this group has done some really, really special things, and it's been fun to watch. Not the ultimate goal, and I understand that as well. So hopefully, the moves that are to come set the team up for that position, and it starts now, Steve. You and I are going to have a lot of trade deadline content coming up, and I cannot wait because it's like the best time of the year for you and I.
Oh my goodness, I need a tissue after you saying that. That was just that good. That was Toy Story 3 good, man.
Huh.
And I listen,
Worst movie, man. I cry like a baby to that one.
I'll never forget, I could be 80 years old, I could be on my deathbed. I will never forget 2022 season, being behind 3-1 to Pittsburgh, coming back, Crosby goes down, you win game 5, that sneaky goal on Domingue game 6, and then game 7, Mika tying it with 4 minutes to go in the third, and then Panarin OT, and then obviously going down and taking Carolina to 7. I'll never forget that. So I do agree with you. This core has had a lot of successes, and I still think they have some successes left in the tank in the future. But all that remains to be seen, as this will wrap us up here on this episode of Puck Talk CS trade deadline this week. We'll have more content for you leading up to whatever happens. And always remember, it's just the luck of the puck.